Senator Johnson, for what purpose?
Questions of the author?
Do you yield?
Of course, I'll yield.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Hughes. Lawyer to lawyer, let's talk about enforcement. I'm a little concerned about the enforceability of this statute, and I'm going to restrict my questions to what I contemplate being the amendment where we're talking about the adverse action to be prohibited, severely restricted, at least in comparison to its original form, where it talks about taking adverse action against any person based wholly or partly on the person's membership in, et cetera, et cetera. So we're talking about, I think the Chick-fil-A example is a perfect example. And we're talking about airports. And you had mentioned earlier that one of the city council members thought that perhaps Chick-fil-A might be offensive to people. Which strikes me from the get-go as a pretty good reason not to have them be at the airport. Welcome to San Antonio, we don't like certain kinds of people. So pretty good reason not to have them there in the first place. But you want to make sure it's not just because they're giving money to a religious organization, that's not the basis.
Right.
So let's back up a step. Would you agree with me that if Chick-fil-A wraps its sandwiches and the white buns and stuff in paper that says no gay people, that would be a good reason and a legitimate reason for the airport to not have them as a vendor?
And of course, Senator, and that would not... the answer is of course yes.
And it wouldn't be affected by the statute at all?
Exactly right. They would have no protection under this statute, as I read it, to make sure I'm not missing something.
And I agree with you. So we're going to take another step. Now, instead of wrapping its sandwiches in offensive wrappers, it gives money to a non-religious organization that hosts anti-LGBT parades every Sunday morning. Pretty offensive. Not covered by the statute, but would you agree with me that that might be a good legitimate reason for an airport authority to say, nope, not selling sandwiches here?
You can certainly see why they would do that, and I know where we're going, but you're correct. Under this bill, that's not a religious organization.
That's right.
Even under any definition, but certainly not under the one in this statute.
All right, so we're going to go one more step now.
All right.
We're going to use a little bit of hyperbole. Now, instead of a non-religious organization that holds anti-LGBT parades every Sunday, you give money to a religious organization that very firmly and sincerely believes that homosexuality is a sin, and we are going to have a little speech in all our stores every Sunday.
Senator, there's the language about sincerely held religious beliefs, to make sure we're clear, is completely out.
Okay.
With the image. I just want to make sure we're clear.
The point is, we just gave money to a religious organization that is participating in behavior that some would find offensive. And what concerns me about enforcement in the courts is that strikes me as if you're keeping them out of the airport, you're at least partly doing it, and partly is what's in this amendment, on the basis of the contribution to that offending religious organization. How are we going to solve that dilemma?
But to be clear, Senator, and it's a good question, to be clear, Senator, if they are taking actions in their stores as you described that is causing people not to want to go there, that's obviously going to be a business decision, and there's no way...
And they're not going to make much money.
That's right, and no one could bring a claim against the city for not letting them in. But if it's about their affiliation with a religious organization, and again, as defined in the amendment we described, that kind of religious organization, I think that addresses the problem.
But partly, don't we have a problem there? Because they gave money to a religious organization that's doing something that's questionable. Are we going to say that's not partly, or are they going to be able to defend it and say, hey, this is partly related to our contribution to this offensive organization?
Well, as you know, and as Senator Hinojosa and I discussed, the plaintiff in one of these cases, the ones who claim to have been aggrieved, to have been discriminated against, they've got to prove their case. So they're the ones that are going to have to show that. And so the city doesn't have to prove that they weren't being discriminatory. The plaintiffs got to prove that they were. And that's important. And you and I know, you understand that.
Now, does your amendment as proposed, which I understand we'll see in a minute, does it provide any guidance to the courts to how to figure out what partly means here?
Well, Senator, this is plugged into the existing procedures we have in courts, and as you know, the rules of evidence and the Civil Practice and Remedies Code, and all those provisions would apply in a civil action under this case. And as you know, the procedures and common law and the rules are pretty well developed to allow courts to answer these questions.
Well, it'll probably have to get developed, and I submit to you that I'm concerned about this statute being unconstitutionally vague, and I appreciate you indulging my steps along this logical path.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.